So I am a mobile strategist. I work at Panelists, and also I work with Maribel to lead the Emerging Technology Council. And basically that's a community of now almost 250 folks just like you, basically sharing experiences and ideas and figuring out how do we take advantage of all these new technologies that we want to bring to the enterprise. So this is kind of like, this panel is going to be a little mini view of what that looks like. We would love for you to, if you're not already part of the ETC, to join that conversation, become part of it as well. And I'd like to invite two members who we're going to chat with about modernization. First is Paris Fogle from Interstate Batteries. And I'll have them say a little bit more about themselves as they come. And then also Russ Johnson from Cintas. All right.
All right.
So, as we get into this conversation, like Maribel kicked us off talking about enterprise transformation and digital transformation, and the only way that you transform is what are you transforming from? So a lot of that has to do with the technology that many of us had or inherited when we got to the companies that we're at. And some people will call that legacy technology sometimes. I had someone who brought the phrase heritage technology. It kind of feels a little bit nicer than legacy, maybe a little bit. And that brings a lot of challenges. Number one, there's a lot of high cost of operations around that. Many times you'll hear that we take 80% of the IT budget just to keep the lights on. A lot of times there's a lot of kind of fragility and inflexibility. So what it does well because it's coded very specifically, and maybe using things like stored procedures, which have been around for a while, but doesn't always let us do the things that we want to do next that we need from a business perspective. And then also other challenges like what I like to call mortalityware, which is the people who can actually code and support those technologies are not going to, maybe aren't part of the workforce or with us at all anymore. So that's another reason why we would want to, on our own, to adopt new technologies. But sometimes it doesn't happen when we want it to. Sometimes it's just SAP or Oracle. Some of the other vendors that we've invested in said that I'm not supporting the version that you have any longer, so you got to do something. It's kind of, you don't have to stay here, but you have to kind of keep going with that. And so in the last 10 years, there's been a lot of change, obviously, in terms of what do we want to do from a digital transformation perspective. A lot of that is around the smartphone. So it's been a great opportunity. I know that both Russ and Paris have some good stories that they'll be able to share with us about how bringing the smartphone into the enterprises, I'm sure you guys have experiences too, really creates an amazing opportunity for business transformation. But a lot of that, and business re-engineering, but a lot of that means that we need to change the platforms that we have, or at least modernize them to some extent so that we can take advantage of the things that we want to do. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And we're going to talk about some of the basics of modernization, but we're also going to talk about how we might want to take advantage of things like IoT and machine learning and all that fun stuff. And we also want to get into part of the conversation of how can we move faster, because it's something that we all want to do. But there was a Forrester survey that I saw recently that said that 60% of executives feel that they're behind. And that's probably how a lot of us feel. So we're going to talk about how can we go faster, how do we make sure that we take the right path and don't take the proverbial wrong left turn at Albuquerque. So for any of you Bugs Bunny fans out there who kind of get the reference. So let's get into the conversation. So first of all, in your organizations, where does this impetus for modernization come from? So the Forrester survey talks a lot about the C-suite, but that's not necessarily where all the initiatives come from, and even the ones that we really want to take forward that have a lot of value. So in each of your organizations, maybe you can speak to a little bit about where those good ideas arise.
Sure. So my personal experience. So I'm just coming off of about 22 years with co-consolidated in my former life. So I've spent about the past month and a half with Interstate batteries. So I got a couple of different lenses that I look through. I think with both of them, though, I really think that a lot of it has to be driven from the business. The story that I've heard over and again and seen it is that typically IT-driven initiatives tend to fail. The business tends to push back. There's a resistance to change, and honestly, it doesn't seem like I think the days of CIOs being wooed by big vendors and bringing in this technology and pushing it down are kind of falling on the wayside too. I think it's really your business, and it's almost IT has to be the liaison to kind of help them through. Hey, look, I hear what you need, and let me show you how to get there.
Yeah, that's interesting because we actually just got a new CIO a couple years back, and he's from the business, so he's brings that accountant background, the leadership within one of our larger lines of business, and he comes in with that attitude, of kind of show me, the business benefits, show me how this is going to improve the way our drivers work, the way our plants work. So he really brings that perspective of business leadership, financial responsibility to IT, which I think is critical in the way that we interact with the business in general. To your question, I think from where do these ideas come from? They all come from our customers, and really the question is who brings the idea to IT. And sometimes it comes through the business. Sometimes you'll see that from the bottom up, where you get the people who are actively interacting with their customers every day get that idea. Sometimes it'll come from the C-suite, where they're seeing other companies do it, or they're seeing their peers do that. So I see it come from both sides.
Okay, so I guess, and within that, there are a lot of times when we have the technology that we have today, and there's an interesting kind of point where you can say that, all right, I have got this business process that I want to improve, or this completely new either line of business or service that we want to deliver. And sometimes you're kind of on that point of when can I continue to try and grind the most out of the technology that I have versus when do we have to do something really kind of completely different? How have you guys kind of tried to find that point of when it's enough to keep doing incremental innovation versus something that's kind of discontinuous?
Yeah, from my perspective, I do a lot of home renovation on the side. So, I always think of it in terms of, is it a tear down or is it a remodel? Am I going to tear it down to the foundation and just build a new structure, or am I just looking to spruce up a few rooms or maybe just do some of that? So, it's hard to make that decision. I think. From my perspective, I look at it, is the space still viable? Or from a technology perspective, is the current business process still viable? Is it still effectively meeting our customer needs? And really to determine that, you got to look at what the factors are. So there's external factors. So things like, is there new technology that might impact that? Are there competitors? Things like that. So external to the business process, sometimes internal pressures like, are we going through a large period of growth? Or maybe there's a strategic shift at the top, from the top down, that says, hey, this business process is broken. And so those things, I look at those different factors to determine, am I able to continue, incrementally to improve this, or do I really need to start a new foundation and really start from scratch? So I guess that's how I look at it.
Yeah, I think that a lot of times the big radical changes that you're going to make and around innovation are going to occur, when the timing's right. So it's almost like you want to kind of seed that environment in advance by doing a lot of that incremental change, and start kind of driving a culture where it's going to be adopted and you're going to see it and it's going to kind of bubble up on its own, enable your workforce to kind of help drive some of that lower level innovation to, because the big stuff's going to come when the time's right, I think, and it's more a matter of, are you ready to adopt to it? And so for us, I think, when we deployed iPads out to our sales force was a big one, because the guys went from, it totally disrupted how they went to market. They were used to carrying paper around with them everywhere they went, and now they're, the CEO told him, hey, look, if I get in the car with you, I'm going to take your paper and chunk it out the window, because you're supposed to have that iPad now, and it's a huge shift, in the way they go to market.
Yeah, and a lot of the when the time is right, often comes down to also not just the opportunity, but also the budget side of things. Like Russ, you were talking about doing the teardown. And a lot of times, the legacy technology, it's kind of like an architectural dig. Like there's just layers of code upon code, and it becomes harder and harder to, get that, extra amount out of it versus having to really kind of do a full rewrite or start from scratch. And that, also is not just expensive, but also risky. So when working with the business to get the funding and to maybe, the CFO or whomever, how do you go about kind of making that case that we're finally at this point and balancing the business value versus the cost of generating that value?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard and it's easy. I mean, there's times when selling a project can be very difficult because it's not something that the business wants to hear at that time. They're very happy with the way things are going. Profits are flowing in. But when you look at it, you say, well, this is starting to get stale. This is starting to be something that we need to spend money on. And a lot of times the business doesn't want to do that. So it's really about, from my perspective, finding the right timing for things. And sometimes that can be, when the business starts to see a shift or when the business starts to transform themselves, then you can kind of slip in under that and say, okay, well, while you're doing that, let's do these other things. In our case, we had a huge SAP initiative where we took a lot of custom developed back-end systems and put in SAP. So as part of that, we can slip in this whole mobility platform behind it, or services platform behind it, so we can enable mobility and we can enable IoT and other things behind it. So that's just a matter of timing, finding the right timing. Sometimes it's about finding the right person, the right business sponsor, someone who really sees things the way that you do and can provide that justification, provide that financial benefit because they're the owner of that budget or they're the owner of that, and they can sell that to their boss. But we always got to talk in terms of the business benefit or a competitive advantage, or talk about it in the way that the business understands. Because when we talk about IoT or we talk about drones or we talk about whatever, it's a lot of times you're just going to get laughed off out of the meeting because they don't care about those things. They care about profit. They care about being able to better serve our customers.
Yeah, and just to kind of add on to what Russ said, I think it's a lot of cases it's about leveraging the data. Make the data tell your story. Yeah. Utilize Matrix. To kind of get the requirements from them and then turn it around and show them the data and say, hey, look, I hear what you're saying and here's what it is and here's the story, to kind of help leverage the the budget conversation, make it a little easier.
Cool. So when you've kind of each of you have led different programs to either modernize technology, introduce some new technologies. Take us through a little bit of the way that you try and phase that through. Like, how do you think about building a sustainable plan? Like Michael Lombardi is used to be a GM for the Raiders and the Browns and whatever. He always had a line that I remember, which is don't confuse hope for a plan. Like, we hope if we do these things that we will get this outcome, but if you don't plan for it, it's never works out quite so well. So,
So I'm a big strategy guy. I think it all comes down to having a good mobile strategy in place. And at the very beginning of your mobile strategy, you got to establish a baseline. You got to set up, do a mobile maturity assessment, and go out there and look at your environment and have a real story with your folks. And I think once you start establishing that baseline and setting up that assessment, a lot of things come out that you may not have even known. You may be working with a group that you didn't even realize, like, hey, UI UX, we've got all these little pockets. So we do UI UX, we just don't really do it together as a team. I think it begins with the strategy, because then otherwise you just don't know where to start, or either that or you're starting in the wrong place. And it also gives you that place, the starting place to say, all right, so how are we getting better? So you can go back and tell that story to your CIO, your CTO, to say, all right, 6 months from now, here's where we were, and now here's where we are today.
Yeah, I mean, I think the strategy is critical to not only telling that story, but also getting the buy-in of the other parts of the organization that are involved in that. And I think it's a great communication tool for that. I think once you have that strategy in place, it's about finding those low hanging fruit, those quick wins that you can get out there, or maybe it's about finding the right project that has the right timing, as I talked about earlier. Is looking at what's going on in the business, looking at what else is going on. Maybe this is the right project for this time, but there's just so many pieces to a project going successfully or being successful in the end. I mean, that strategy is really key to getting the vision, getting everyone in alignment, and then getting it started. And then obviously from an execution perspective, there's a lot of pieces that go along with that.
Yep. Okay, so let's talk about some impact a little bit. You guys have each worked on a number of different projects, and this is a good, this is all really about sharing. So maybe, can you talk about, a project that you've worked on recently that's kind of had, significant, impact to the organization, and, how'd it go and why'd you do it?
Yeah, I mean, my favorite one is to, so I try to spend a lot of time out, in the market, with the folks, wherever it is that I'm working at, just to kind of get a better understanding of what their day's like. And at Coke, it was very much, you have this account developer that's spending 10 to 12 hours of his day out in the field. Some of the trade-offs, he is able to do a lot of his job straight from his house. He doesn't have to come back into the office as much. But, now that he's got this technology, and now that he's got the ability to onboard customers while he's in the market, as opposed to going back to his laptop at home and working on it, it buys back more time for his family. At the same time, he's able to actually squeeze in more accounts, but that buying back, his time and giving him more time to spend out with his family, those are always the stories that I think kind of warm my heart a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, one of our most recent projects is around sales as well. And it's really about our sales reps, when they go and get a new customer and want to turn them into a customer, go to prospects and turn them into customers. It's about reducing that time. So how long does it take for you to just go to that initial prospect, and then the time to the first, we call it the time of the first invoice. So it's about how do we shorten that time frame? How do we, because we kind of deal in volume from a business perspective. We have over 1 million customers. So in order to keep that funnel going, we have to have a large influx of customers coming in every week. And that's really how our sales reps are incentivized, is weekly. So providing them a tool that makes it easier for them to gather the information, only enter it once, and then automatically generate customers in the back end that are ready to be serviced, is a pretty powerful tool. And mobility is a way to provide that in a way that makes it easy for them to use, makes them want to use it, and just does it in a way that's very elegant. So it's an exciting project for us. It has real business benefit in terms of being able to get more revenue out of our customers, because the sooner you can service that customer, the more invoices you're going to have. And then it also helps the sales reps in terms of, it reduces the amount of data they have to capture, first of all, and then second of all, it just makes it easier for them to key it in. So there's benefits all around, but I mean, it's just a good project for us.
Cool. And what you talked about, also underscores the point that a lot of times when you're building these kind of elegant experiences, you're creating new business processes, that you're also needing to pull in data from all sorts of different systems that maybe didn't used to talk to each other. So a lot of times integration is, in these projects, is one of the more challenging aspects to it. So can you share a little bit, maybe this is a little bit more of a technical bent to where we've gone so far, but where you've been able to, or how you've been able to use cloud or microservices or API management or MBAS platforms to make that all happen?
Well, from our perspective, it's interesting because we talk about all these fancy online communications and real-time services, and we're still dealing with offline scenarios because we have about 10 to 12,000 drivers that are everywhere in the US. And so if they're at a customer site and they can't get to the data they need to get to because there's no cellular connection there, we still have to support that use case. Right. So it's interesting that even with all of this technology we have, we're still not there 100%. So we at Cintas actually do a lot around how do we deal with the offline scenario. And so we've come up with a platform that we use from SAP, the SAP mobile platform, that provides us with a way to take these online services and turn it into an offline data store that we can query and utilize just like you would a web service. So it's a very intuitive platform for us, something that we've been very happy with for our mobilization efforts. And it allows us to use OData, allows us to use a lot of newer web service technologies. We're not using kind of microservices as it's defined strictly in the field, but we do utilize a lot of cloud platform services through Dynamics 365, and we're starting to utilize more SAP cloud services as well. So we're really starting to pull all that together through our mobile platform as a central kind of data hub for us at this point.
Yes. So at Interstate, we're in the process of evaluating new integration partners for mobile backend as a service. Trying to find partners that are going to be a good fit and that are going to work well with the API management level, and it's trying to kind of explain to different folks. So we're working with a bunch of different ones at Coke and coming into Interstate. One of the experiences I like to share is there's a huge difference between, I've never seen one that doesn't work yet, but there's been a lot of them that you've worked with that it's just, you have to throw so many people at it to make it work that it just kind of offsets the cost. If you have to have 3.5 full-time FTEs that manage this MBAS level versus, this one kind of set it and forget it, and maybe you dial in every 6 months just to make some tweaks based on upgrades that are going on around your environment. I think that's kind of critical.
Yeah. So let's kind of talk about some of these new, sexier type of technologies that are coming around. Mm-hmm. Machine learning and/or AI, if AI truly exists. AR and VR, IoT, blockchain. How have you thought about which one of these or more than one of these to kind of start to bring into the enterprise? And kind of like a second layer to that question is, how do you also avoid utilizing a technology for a technology's sake when there's more mature technologies that are out there that actually work, that that will do the same job, but instead of, I think blockchain is a good example of a lot of people want to use blockchain just to say that they're using blockchain, but they're not actually using it in a way that
you couldn't use another
really,
technology.
Right, yeah. So,
yeah, there's so much of that right now with all of the hype around all these new technologies. It's very hard to find good business implementations of it. Blockchain, I think I was at a SAP Leonardo conference a few weeks ago, and I think there was maybe 1 or 2 people who had valid uses for it out of hundreds of companies that were there. I'm like, okay, that's really just tells you right there that there's lots of good potential out there, but there's really not a whole lot of people that know how to use it yet, and how to use it that isn't any different from how to using a database instead. So From our perspective, we've got some magic flying drones delivering uniforms and washing our clothes for us. So no, we don't have any of that. But we are looking at IoT specifically. We've got a lot of garments out there. We've got a lot of devices out there. Mats, mops, towels, everything can have devices in it. But it's really, when you talked about what do we look at things that will enhance our business, will add to our bottom line. And it's not just about things that make it easier for us to service our customers, it's things that we can maybe collect from our customers and sell back to them. When you talk about data as a service, it's data as a new line of business, potentially for Cintas. So from my perspective, that's how we're looking at it. We're looking at it, how can it be transformative to us and to our customers going forward?
Yeah, so at Coke, it was, there were several places where we were looking at, augmented reality, virtual reality. I think virtual reality, one of the ones that was really intriguing to me was onboarding experience, just because there's, such an immersive experience with, say I'm a merchandiser, instead of the traditional way was to sit at a branch and stare at pop in the VHS video, and then this guy's supposed to watch it, and by the way, your supervisor doesn't want to watch it because he's seen that thing like 5 times already this week. So he walks away, and then, what's the first thing that the guy does? He pulls out his smartphone, and starts texting like, oh, I can't believe I'm watching this. They're using old school technology. And so, trying to take that and transcend it into a virtual experience where, you've got your merchandiser, he's got his goggles on, and he's actually walking through a day in the life of the merchandiser. It's just a much more immersive experience. That and augmented reality was one where, we were using some software to, and we were just starting to pilot this to place vending machines. So you'd walk into a store with your iPad and you can actually say, hey, Mr. Store Owner, what do you think about having this cooler placed over here, or this vending machine over here? And you could see people kind of interacting with it because you could see them walking through, like just like you had your camera up, and you could see exactly, that's not going to fit. People just walk straight through there all the time, and it's going to be in the way, or maybe it'd look better here because this is really a high traffic area. You're going to get more sales here. So that's another example of the kind of the augmented reality. Another one is for sales, and you guys probably have seen some of this too, where you're starting to kind of utilize maps in like real dense urban areas to say, okay, so here's my customers right here, but this new Chinese restaurant, that guy's not one of my customers. I need to probably go talk to him. That's a cold call right there. IoT, there's a lot of different examples where most recently I think coolers were a big one. We'd start to put beacons in coolers, and one of the people don't realize this, and I think Neil Garner talked about this a couple of years ago, how coolers, especially Coke coolers, tend to grow legs and walk away. You wouldn't think they'd disappear, but it's the kind of thing that you really need to keep a good eye on, apparently. We were playing around with beacons, kind of using them to kind of help track them, and then also do things in developing countries to show them, if you'd see a situation where they were unplugging the cooler at night, to save a little bit of power, and then they were using, 3 times as much power because, the next day they would have to, it'd have to cool it back down again. So, you could use that data to kind of go back and show them, hey, look, you could save a lot of money if you just left it plugged in.
Nice. So we've got a few minutes left. I've got a couple of other questions here, but again, I want to throw it out to the audience to see if they've got any questions for these 2 really smart guys and just looking for insights of your own. Yep.
Excuse me, could you say a name and
Randy Jones, I'm an enterprise architect. You were talking about the smart cooler, but how do you do the tracking? I mean, if you put Internet of Things on everything, then where's the bandwidth? How do we get to that information, right? What are we using for a channel?
So for us, we would leverage today in the traditional world. It used to be your delivery guy was like your one point of reference that a store owner would have. And in today's world, it's you got an account developer, you got a merchandiser, you got your delivery driver, but they're all carrying devices. All of them have mobile devices. And so what we were doing was enabling some low energy Bluetooth connections. So that as they'd walk in with their mobile device, they didn't even have to do anything. It would just kind of sweep in the background, pick up the data, and then once they establish another connection, it'd kind of send it back in. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and one other thing I'll add is, yeah, data definitely costs, but it doesn't, usually from IoT devices, you're not sending a whole lot of information back. I think a lot of the challenges that people have, at least with a cooler, usually have a power source. And that's kind of one of your biggest problems in terms of wanting to use the traditional, LTE types of communications as opposed to like, 802.15 or Zigbee or, some other low power vehicle. So, it really depends on what you're trying to track and what type of data that you're trying to get. And you kind of get that iron triangle of the cost of the sensor that you want to put on, the type of communications bandwidth that you have, and then also the compute power of that sensor too. And so some of the challenges.
And I think in today's world too, we tend to over-engineer things. We tend to kind of overthink things and like, oh, we need all this data, and really like the kind of stuff that we were looking at, is it on? Is it off? What's the temperature? Yeah, just real simple, and you can do a lot with that kind of data. And then you start looking at, lining that data up with other data that is relative, the store hours and stuff like that. And, you can get a lot of stuff out of it. But, so many times we're trying to, say, hey, look, we need all this data. And when really maybe just 1 or 2 points is, would add a lot of business value.
Eva Donaldson. Whoa, eye contact. So, I think you might have already said what I was going to ask you to talk about, but one of the big things that happens with a lot of this technology, and particularly with bringing data together, I'm a data architect. I had a business intelligence department, and as soon as I gave them 2 points, they wanted 7,000. So can you talk a little bit about focus, how you maintain the focus, and how you say to those people, no, I can't give you 7,000. Let me give you 2, because that's affordable, and how you keep them focused.
Yeah, I guess from our perspective, as we're looking at future projects, I see where it could go into that, where you have an infinite number of possibilities of things that we could look into, and from my perspective, it's about delivering the simplest solution, the quickest, right? So getting something out there and then building on it, because if you spend years and years and years building this perfect, solution that delivers 10,000 data points a minute, it's like, that's great, but you spent 2 years doing that, and now everyone else has, a million data points a second. So, sometimes it's good just to get your, what you can, get something out there simple, and then build on it. And I think that comes back to leadership from a project perspective or from a business perspective to keep that team focused and to keep everyone together. I don't know what you've experienced.
Yeah, very similar. For us, I think, of course, Coke's, 100-plus-year-old business. It's the waterfall mentality is just like so ingrained in the culture. And I used to think it was like just an IT thing, and it's really not. Your business partners, they want to give you, here's all my requirements. I want it all, and I want it right now. No, what do you mean you're going to come back to me? You're going to give me one? No, I know how this works. You're going to give me that one, and then you're going to be gone, Yeah. So I think you almost have to have, some real cheerleaders in your agile approach to, make sure they understand that, hey, look, this is not one and done. Let's do this, and then there's this, and kind of show them that roadmap. Mm-hmm. And I think once you kind of start executing on that and do, maybe 1 or 2 projects worth them where you show them that, hey, look, this is a growing thing, and it's not going to be perfect when we put it out there, but it's going to, as we kind of move through this, it's going to continue to get better, and it's going to continue to add business value each time. And
that does bring up an interesting point when you deal with physical devices that are out there, right? Because those are oftentimes hard to change.
Yeah.
So that's something you definitely have to keep in mind as you're doing more IoT-based things. Is even though you want to keep it simple, if you keep it too simple, maybe you can't deliver what you need to with your long-term value. So you also got to have a little bit of waterfall thinking ahead of time to make sure that you're designing for something that meets your end requirements, even though you're delivering only maybe these 2 data points up front.
Yep.
And I think, Paris, to your earlier point of you may want to have all this data, but you really need to know when did it get turned on, when did it get turned off, and what's the temperature. I think trying to help people start with what are the first questions that we want to know, and don't rush don't rush to asking every question that's possible, because once you start to collect data, you're going to realize what the next question is that's important to you. And that, I will think, drive kind of that iterative approach of what do we do next? And then there's always also, especially if we're talking IoT and having sensors out there, is what information can we gather with the sensors that we've deployed, or the systems that we have? Can we measure as finely as maybe you want, or maybe we can't, and so therefore let's not ask for that piece of data, ask for trying to answer that question just yet.
Yeah, evaluating MDM, a good MDM partner too, having that good partner ecosystem, I think it's got to be critical. I think we really got to start looking at our MDM partners who are really starting to invest and leverage in IoT, and feeling like they can kind of help make a difference in that.
Okay.
Good question.
One more from the crowd, or? All right, guess not. So maybe just we'll kind of end with kind of like a parting shot. So, for the other folks here in the room, you guys have gone through some pretty interesting projects. Any kind of last bits of advice that you might want to share for someone who's looking to take on a big modernization project or bring on some new technology?
Yeah, I'll start. I think I've got two probably that really stick in my mind. One is, and I think I kind of mentioned this earlier, create checklist. It seems so simple, but I think a lot of times when you go after a big project like that, we're thinking, we tend to over-engineer it, right? We're thinking about all these different things that are going to catch us way out here when maybe it's something small. Maybe it's that your core group that you're working with didn't read the deliverables from the statement of work from the first vendor that you engaged. And then now everyone's got a bad taste, and the thing kind of fumbles out of control, and you stumble straight out of the starting gates. So I think it's the simple things to kind of keep in mind a lot of times when you go after one. And the other one is UI UX is truly king. I don't think that there is a better way to go after eliminating your shadow IT than investing in your UI UX.
Well, I don't have as many touchy-feely ones. I think those are good, good forward-looking. Mine are more like what not to do. So I have a lot of those experiences from my projects, and it's really around just trying to foresee challenges, trying to look ahead and see what could bring down your implementation. Because I'm kind of looking at it from the perspective of after you've already kind of put together a strategy and start to execute on it, there's things that can kind of slow you down and or kind of take away from your momentum, trying to see those ahead of time. So, and I see a lot of that coming from within IT itself, because a lot of that is, when we talked about earlier, a lot of your your legacy application groups or your legacy infrastructure groups. And there's just a lot of fear that goes around the delivery of a lot of these new platforms, because many of them aren't dependent on them necessarily. They're something that might be outside, delivered through a cloud strategy or delivered through a new device that they don't maybe manage. So it's understanding, first of all, from a skills perspective, do we have the skills to support this? Because that's going to be the number one thing, that if you deliver this and we can't support it, it's going to kill your adoption very quickly. And your CIO is not going to be very happy with you. And the second thing is, from an SDLC perspective, is do you need to change? Do you have the right processes in place to support it as well from a development cycle perspective? A lot of newer technologies might require a different SDLC, or developers in those technologies might like to use a different SDLC than what you traditionally do with some of your legacy applications. And then finally, territorial disputes between leaders or executives in your IT organization. Don't underestimate that, because I think a lot of that can hurt you, because you get people kind of maybe sniping at or pulling resources away from you when you should be adding resources to it. So those are all things that I've personally experienced that I think would be what you'd be well advised to look out for.
Okay, awesome. So we've got 12, 11 seconds to go. So I think we've used up our time almost perfectly. So I just want to thank again Paris Fogle from Interstate, Russ Johnson from Cintas. Thanks so
Thanks,
much.
Glenn. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it, Glenn. Thanks, Ben.